Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. We have with us today brother Tam Hussein, uh, whose name is, whose his pen name, Tam is, and he'll introduce himself fully to you, inshallah, with his ethnic background and his life in the UK. Once we start with him. But Tam is a British investigative journalist, writer, filmmaker whose work often explores issues of extremism, faith, migration, and identity in contemporary Europe and in the Middle East, of course. Over the years, he's reported for major outlets such as The Guardian, the BBC, and Al Jazeera. And he's produced in depth analysis on subjects ranging from jihad movements to the rise of the European far right. His reporting blends field experiences with historical insight, offering nuanced examinations of how ideology, class, and culture intersect in moments of political upheaval. Hussein's storytelling often bridges the human and the geopolitical, focusing on how ordinary people navigate the turbulence of modern politics and the social consequences of conflict, prejudice, and belonging. Tam Hussein, how are you doing, brother? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you very much for having me. Really, really privileged for you to have me on. Thank you.
It is an absolute privilege for us to have you on. Brother Tam, what's your full name and how did you come about the name Tam Hussein? Then we'll get into the actual weeds of the
Right.
of your book and then your
So,
work.
so my full name is Abdul Fattah Danjeeb Hussein.
Right,
I in the UK, I don't like people calling me just Abdul, you know.
right.
And I don't know if you have this in Pakistani culture, but Danjeeb is what your mother gave you. So I wanted to have a name which people can remember
Mm.
and easily. So Tam Hussein takes my surname, my family name, as well, and Tam means complete in Arabic. So I thought, you know what, let's just use that, and that's how it came about. There is no other significance apart that. It's just an easily pronounceable name, and it sounds Muslim enough, to give a hint of who I am and so on. And that's why I adopted that name,
Yeah,
you
it
know.
rolls off the tongue. It does work. You recently on the resurgence of the far right, the ending of the article I would like to read out for the audience in Newsline
Yeah.
magazine. I think it would be good if we could hear it word for word. I don't want to play the victim, nor do I want to be considered thus. I want to be able to leave with a semblance of dignity before those patriotic marchers in Trafalgar Square turn into a murderous mob. As has befallen Europe in the past, I don't want to be like the last king of Granada, Abu Abdil, who wept when he looked at the Alhambra as he left it forever, only for a woman to pour scorn on his tears. Why do you cry like a woman when you couldn't defend it like a man? I don't want anyone's pity, only the strength and courage to leave with dignity when the time comes and to use my particular set of skills wherever they still wanted. A lot of complex emotions are tied into the statement. I mean, the loss of Muslim Spain, obviously, that's a big cultural memory, a point of tragedy in Muslim society, as well as the idea of the brown body, the masculine self of the Muslim man, the South Asian man in your particular case, as much as you hate the term.
Yeah.
There's an element of like a misplaced sense of masculinity in a Western world, which is increasingly unmasculine, and then you find yourself sort of being depicted as the savage, as the groomer, as this vector for terrorism. A lot of emotions of imperial loss, of subjugation, all of them are here, and
Yeah.
and at its core, I think that the thing remains that my Britishness was what I've understood from it, and then you can explain what you meant by this. Is that your Britishness, notwithstanding, you want to remain with dignity as opposed to just your Britishness. If that's the last resort, is that a,
Yeah, I
is that a
mean,
fair assessment of your
eh,
article?
I think that's a fair assessment in the sense that I'm still not British. I'm not applied for British passport and so on. My own family, they were in the UK for about 100 years. I myself, I'm an immigrant. I arrived to the country when I was 11 years old from Sweden. Um, so always been an outsider. But I've flourished and I've benefited, and I hope I've contributed to Britain in its life. And, I remember my mother always raising us, and I think this is a Muslim value, that, when you come into someone's house, even though, you can say, yes, you have a right to be there, but always when you do enter into someone's house, you leave it in a better state. You're honored. At the same time, there are certain ethics and principles you should always, the obligation is more on you than on the person that's hosting you, so in that way, I kind of feel that, I've done more and so on. And then, so the way the country is going, the way Britain is going, you know, it hurts you. There are some aspects of Britain that I really love. For example, it's boxing. It's boxing heritage and all this. I really love all of those things. At the same time, the way the country is going, you have all of these other emotions. And I've always been, there is a saying in Arabic, which is, our heads are held high and our swords are raised, in the sense that, this is something that, one is not subjugated. There is something very, I think you'll find this in Muslim tradition, that there is a martial tradition which has dignity and has all of this kind of stuff. And I think that we have, as we grow up, we get instilled with these kind of aspects. So you don't want to be humiliated, live in a country where you're humiliated. And that matters to me. Same thing, I'm a very, very big fan of boxing, so that martial aspect is a very important thing, and so when you are forced almost to be humiliated and live in that humiliated state, that grates with me, and I'd rather, live with dignity than to ask the master for a passport or something like that. I'd like to stick to that, if that makes sense. And I think that's a sense that a lot of people that I've spoken to have.
आप लोगों की सपोर्ट की वजह से आज हम यहाँ पे हैं. आप लोगों की सपोर्ट की वजह से हम ये कंटेंट बनाते रहते हैं. आप लोगों की सपोर्ट हमें चाहे इनबॉक्स डीएम की मद में है, चाहे वो कमेंट की मद में है, या स्पेशली 3,000 रुपये की सब्सक्रिप्शन की मद में है, हमारे काम को बहुत आगे लेके जाती है. हमें किसी प्लेटफॉर्म की तरफ से कोई सपोर्ट नहीं है. आपके सामने हमारा चैनल डिमोनेटाइज हुआ है, एक दफ़ा नहीं 2 दफ़ा. उसकी वजूहत भी हमने आपको बताई हैं. डिमोनेटाइजेशन या फिर किसी की आवाज़ बंद कर देना बहुत गलत है, चाहे वो किसी भी इशू पे बात कर रहा हो. फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच के साथ खड़े हुए और हमें 3,000 रुपये की सब्सक्रिप्शन प्रोवाइड करें. हमने ऑलरेडी ज़्यादा कंटेंट प्रोड्यूस करना शुरू कर दिया अपने पेड सब्सक्राइबर्स के लिए, और हमारी इवेंचुअली कोशिश होगी कि जो हमारा आधा कंटेंट है वो पेड सब्सक्राइबर्स के लिए ही हो. तो ईऑन फैमिली का पार्ट बने, 3,000 रुपये दें, सब्सक्राइब करें.
I hope that's clear. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
It's perfectly clear. I mean, it's always been the immigration process and the whole project, the post World War II immigration for labor, for cheaper, for rebuilding Europe, for whatever excuse that it might have been, the multicultural project, to create these cosmopolitan melting pots, the money laundering, that aspect is completely ignored.
Yeah.
A lot of immigration was just money laundering because the city of London doesn't do much except attract money from the so-called third world and the global south. And that's pretty much the entire economy nowadays. But it was a lot of things. But it's always been a process with a lot of friction. And you've always had, when I was younger, I visited the UK to visit my family who'd been there for, decades actually. Because I'm from North Punjab in the Gujar Khan area, big diaspora, huge diaspora.
Yeah, yes.
So you might have seen some.
I've got friends exactly from Gujar Khan actually. So
just walk into any chicken shop, just just mention Amanullah, they'll know me. They'll sort you out, inshallah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, they'll sort you out with the.
I might just do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Piriko, my cousin's actual chicken shop chain.
I remember that. I will remember that. Actually,
I'm not even Gloucestershire County. Just check it out. It's a decent. They have one of the finest beef burgers that you can enjoy.
Fine, I'll take that as a recommendation.
I'll email you the links.
Please, I'm going to take my kids. I love that.
Are you a chicken shop connoisseur?
I am, but less so when with regards to I'm watching my health, but I am a chicken shop connoisseur. I
All
am. So
right.
I'm definitely, so with that recommendation, I'm taking that up.
So look.
Seriously.
So when I went to visit my family in the early 2000s, and I saw like skinheads, and I saw
Hmm.
some of the more violent elements like the punk, the alt culture elements
Yeah,
that were anti-immigration. They were fair and few in between, and there was always,
yeah,
especially in working class neighborhoods, there was
yeah,
friction with regards to jobs being stolen or welfare.
yeah,
But what this rise with Tommy Robinson, this new right,
yeah,
the alt right, it's the question of dignity now. That's like, I think you've put it very well, that they're sort of challenging the basic dignity of the people who might be refugees, might be second
yeah,
generation, might be first
yeah,
generation, might just be here for a quick buck for whatever reason.
yeah,
But the very dignity of those people is being challenged, and I
yeah.
think it's become for the first time, like responses like yourself and a lot of other people I've spoken to, is that where do we go from here now? Like you
Yeah.
never heard that before. Now people are like, I
Yes.
guess we have to, because it's not even a question of whether a formal re-immigration will happen. It's a question of how many years can we tolerate this indignity? Is
I
that
think you
yeah?
hit on the head. I think that's the plan B, because what you have is, like before, when, let's say, our parents came, you know, it was seen as, who are these people? You know, who are these people? They're taking our jobs or whatever. But here you've got, you know, accountants, you've got professionals who are actually genuinely contributing to the country, and they don't even want them. So I remember I was at Juma last Friday. I was speaking to a friend of mine. He's an accountant, he's a very successful accountant. No one can say, he was a very, was raised good family and all of this kind of stuff, very active in the community. And he's like, look, like, what do you mean? They don't even want me. So he's like, he's thinking plan B. That's the issue. It's that there is a plan B here that people are thinking about. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Last time I came to Pack, I was like, yeah, Islamabad. All right, okay, Islamabad. And honestly, that's what I was there last year, and I was like, yeah, I'm looking at this city, that city. Yeah, Islamabad looks like a great place. Lahore, honestly, because you're like, oh yeah, I feel home here. So I thought about that, and that is, I think that's not just me. I think a lot of people think like that. Whereas they didn't. They're like, they didn't necessarily think like that. And part of that. Look, listen. I do understand. I think we should be careful of confusing change and human nature to just pure racism. So what I mean by that is, I've seen it. You've got to unpack. I'm sure. Let's say in JLM, some next local village moves into your part of the woods, and then those villagers are saying, "What's going on with these guys?" Right? There is that which change is difficult to understand, which is part of human nature, right? And then there is that racism that's there. You know, now, I understand that if you be, and because I've seen it in the south, in the south of Italy, very, very sweet grandma, good people, I've been living in that part of the world for, let's say, 80 years. And suddenly, you're seeing different people, and it's hard to understand the, different languages and all of this kind of stuff. That I understand. That's human nature, you know. But then you've got like this vitriolic bad faith kind of racism, and that's been fed, over decades. You had
But
a
in an
guest,
organized, so
one of
in
my
an
colleagues,
organized
Faisal
sense,
Hanif, right? I think
pardon?
I think you interviewed one of my colleagues, one of my friends, Faisal Hanif, who's done a lot of work on this,
Yes,
over
yes, yes.
decades, over
Yeah.
decades
No,
of
but here's
just
the thing:
pushing the same message,
that kind of vitriolic hatred, which is almost irrational, on an individual level, it could exist. It's the organized forms of this, which are
Yeah, yeah,
clearly disingenuous political manufacturing. Some of it is Zionist. We know for a fact some of it is, a lot of it has been Zionist, because if I were to encapsulate the last 40, 50 years, these were the war on terror years,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
This was the half century of the war on terror or something. And the war on terror, the rhetoric before it, that preceded it, and the rhetoric that came out of it was very well manufactured in Tel Aviv, in Washington, in London, and it was designed specifically to scapegoat Muslims. Of all the immigrants, like, so for example, I spoke with this about about this with another journalist from the UK the other day, that groomer immediately means Pakistani Muslim
Yeah,
man.
yeah, exactly. And you know,
Right,
and
even though the generic term of child grooming is a very is a popular objective scientific term to describe a pedophile who grooms children, a reprehensible
yeah,
act that should be punished.
and I guarantee you, bro, I'm sure you know, bro. Like, you know, you can speak to any Pakistani, any, you know, Bengali. You go to them, you say to them, listen, is this right? This is not, it's haram. And they will say, they will automatically say it. So it's just basically these guys, nighttime economy, and they forget this. This is something that often people, the other half of it, they don't sometimes realize. How did they get into it? Because I had a colleague of mine who investigated how did these taxi drivers get into it? Because they were taking some of these girls and they were taking them to also white guys, you know, but that aspect of it isn't fully recorded, fully understood. And I just think to myself, these things that go on, they are wrong, but this is not in particular to, let's say, a specific culture. These are just, look, these go on in white cultures. You know, the pornification of society has led to a lot of these things, a lot of societal problems, and one specific race or people have been scapegoated, whether that be, look, very, very recently, we're looking in the media about, if it's a Muslim, and I remember I've covered this for years. If it's a Muslim, it's a terror case. If it's not, it's not this. If we looked at, for example, very recently, last week, we had a man stabbing 10 people, right? 10 people. And, if it was a Muslim, I'm pretty sure that would be labeled a terrorist attack. I'm pretty sure there are other cases I've seen, like where the guy had actually was a homosexual, and he had actually converted to Christianity, and it was still labeled as terrorism because of his Muslim background and so on. So you look at these things and you're like, okay, look, these are problems. These are problems, and that's just over decades. Over decades. So and that's I'm someone who covered jihadism and terrorism and so on. I think I know my topic pretty well, and still, I mean, I myself have been caught up in some of these things, and you're like, okay, this is a problem now. This is a problem. And I've always looked at tone. How do you describe people? Because I know that that's going to have an effect on my kids. It's gonna, whatever reporting you do, it's gonna have an impact on my kids, and that's something that we need to be aware of. And some of it is concerted, for sure. For sure, it is.
It seems like a large part of it is very well manufactured. I mean, the Brexit movement and Marine Le Pen in France, characters like Tommy Robinson in the UK. There's a dozen or so in America, the new right, the alt-right, America
there's been
Firsters.
books on this, the Islamophobia industry and so on. There's been Aaron Kundani has written about this. It's worth reading if you don't read it. I mean, you see this, and society needs a scapegoat. Some of it, I think, is also because, and I mentioned this, I think, look, in a way, the Muslim world know who they are, right? They know kind of who they are because a lot of, the societal structures are still there, Whereas if you look at, for example, what's going on with Europe and the West, it's going through an identity crisis, Now, when you have mass migration, and remember, it's a small percentage in the UK, very, very small percentage in the UK. And you're going through these identity crises, this gets weaponized by the far right. If you look at the Scots and the Welsh, they know very well who they are. That's not the great big problem for them. They kind of like, Scots know, and they set themselves up against English. We're not English. You go to Wales, the Welsh know, who we are. We're not English, but the English have got this problem. Who are we? And that's a problem. And I kind of feel that, look, and I was saying this yesterday, that, look, English people needs to feel that there's nothing necessarily wrong in being English. And I think that's a problem. And I think that's something that comes, maybe the left have been pushing this much. So an Englishman, if he's, for example, proud of Sir Walter Raleigh, he's made to feel bad about that. Whereas if you look at, for whatever Sir Walter Raleigh's fault may be, he was a brave individual. He decided to go on a ship in the middle, and that's brave, and so for him to feel proud about that, he shouldn't necessarily have to apologize for those things, and those are the kind of things you have to like, all right, I understand where he's coming
the sort of weird, the PC culture stuff, the DEI stuff, that's not the immigrants' fault. That's not the Muslims'
absolutely
fault.
exactly, it's not.
In fact, like you might have a South Asian Muslim quote unquote child studying or reading about the Red Coats or about the British Empire, might be more impressed by them than you. That doesn't, and that's a you problem. That's your curriculum. That's your liberal.
Correct.
That's liberal ideology and liberal thinking at its max. That's the logical conclusion. Is the erosion of self-identity, of the erosion of
absolutely.
like the complaints about the sexual order, for example. Like you are a Muslim man, you seem like a socially sort of conservative Muslim man. You seem to practice your religion, and you have a way of carrying yourself, and that extends to your wife and your children, and the sexual dynamics of the male and the female. If you've messed up yours, doesn't mean that our presence is an aggression towards you. It's almost like the subconscious reflection of all the failures of British society or European society are projected onto the scapegoat of Muslim society.
Yeah, I mean, I think to myself, look, I'm very, in my look, I have colleagues that are X, Y, and they have theirs. But I also have, I would consider myself a traditional. I have traditional family. I'm more or less socially conservative or mostly conservative. And so on. That's, I would say that most Muslims are that. Most Muslims are probably that. There'd probably be Tories if the Tories weren't so racist.
Yeah,
there'd probably be that, to be honest with you. That's what the Tories don't really understand. But anyway, so if you look at, for example, precisely that's the issue. Because for example, me, I don't want a deracinated society. I'm one of the reasons when I visited Pakistan, what I loved about Pakistan, I could go to Punjab, I can go to Lahore, and I would get Lahori culture. I can go to Peshawar, I can go to Quetta, I can go to all of these, and I'm getting and I love the Balochi or the Pashto. He's got all of these different identities, and I love precisely that. I don't want to just everyone just looking brown and having a different culture. So if I meet a Catalan, he's proud of his Catalan culture, or it is Italian. I'm quite happy with that. We all don't have to be the same.
And like you said, England has a very beautiful native culture. Yeah. Like the boxing you mentioned, like the fish and chips and the mushy peas and the gingerbread and all of those nice things. And it has food, it has music, it has arts. You have Morris dancers, very impressive.
I mean, look, listen, they have their own culture, and I'm like, I can appreciate them as an outsider,
exactly,
for what they are. I'm like, look, this is, especially they were known for their manners and all of this, and I'm just no issue, and I think that's a problem. I think that's something that the liberal order has to kind of understand, that look, this is also a reaction against that. But like when I think there's one aspect that we need to take into account when we're looking at what's going on, let's say in Britain and Europe, when the political order, when the inequalities between kind of your poor manner, I mean, we can argue whether that happened after the 2008 crash, but that's been continuing long way before, right? When there's gaps in inequality, and then let's say, look, if you look at, for example, you can argue this. If you look at, for example, Nigel Farage seems to, hold to his values in a way. Whether you agree with him or not, that's a different issue, But whereas, if you look at Keir Starmer, he's flippy, he's everywhere, Well, the people have done social media, the clips of him switching this, that, from one position to another, in a few months' time. Absolutely. Whereas at least this guy's like, okay, this is what I stand for, and that's what they are almost. And you find this also, for example, with mainstream media. Like, what's going on? We are seeing on social media what is going on, let's say in Gaza and all this kind of stuff, right? We're seeing that live, and you're reporting on something else. So I'll give you an example. I think it was last year. Was it? No, this year, about the Maccabi fans that went to they went to Amsterdam. How that reporting was changed. Now, people are looking at that thinking, hang on, what's going on here? People can see it with their own eyes. Something's changed. The report that was put out on Sky News was then edited and changed. And you're like, okay, what's going on here? We know the origin. That was a good piece of reporting, very fair. And then that was cut. And people are thinking, hang on, what's going on? So they're blaming the integrity of the West, like mainstream media. They're blaming the integrity of, politicians. And what happens? The far right comes in and starts weaponizing that discontent alongside inequality. It's not the fault of the immigrants for all of these issues. Yeah. 0.02% Miskeen has been running, coming from a war in Iraq that, we were the people in Britain, we paid for, when Afghans were coming over, hang on, that was due to an invasion as well. When we're looking at these, and that was invasion by NATO, and so on. So, we need to when I look at how Ukraine, especially, Ukraine was treated, and how, countries that we had a direct role in are treated, you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? It's just pure, you look at it as almost pure racism, man,
Yeah, the coverage on the Ukraine, I mean, from the get-go, it was quite obvious that, this isn't Iraq, this isn't Afghanistan. These are blonde, blue-eyed
Yeah.
people. These are Europeans. By what stretch of the imagination have the Slavs and Eastern Europeans become Europeans? I have no idea. But
I mean, look,
I'm
happy to accept them as Europeans, and what they're going through, is that war is
Europe and Europeanism clearly seems to be it's like a MacGuffin in like script writing and films, right? It can be whatever they want it to be.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
It's exclusionary of the Greeks and it's exclusionary of the Greeks and the Turks and the Italians when it wants to be, and then all of a sudden they're white and European when they have to claim Greek art and Italian cuisine and
if you read The Count of Monte Cristo, you'll read that the Greeks were Easterners; they were treated as Orientals.
Yeah,
so that definitely is the case. I mean, I don't want to necessarily, belittle the suffering of the Ukrainian people for what they've suffered. My point is simply that, look, if you're opening up your home, because they have that scheme, isn't it, in the UK, where Ukrainian refugees would be given a home, to live with, but you're not necessarily willing to do that with, I mean, I remember I was in Calais in France, man, and I still remember this. I won't mention his name, but this guy, bro, Iraqi guy, blonde, blue-eyed, as it were, and man, he had seen in it, and I heard he was a volunteer, and one of the guys at the kitchen, is Malaysian man, very, very beautiful man, was helping the refugees, feeding them, and he said, this man here, that man had witnessed his own kids being massacred. That's what he saw, and he's here. And they're like, hang on a second, bro. We invaded that country. That is the fruits of that. And if he then were to come to the UK, let's say, you won't have you won't open up you will have it for the Ukrainians, but you won't have it for this brother. Come on.
On that exact point, by the way, a lot of the rhetoric I've heard from the anti-immigration or re-immigration people is that why are we bringing people in from these countries that we've messed up so that they can then take out their anger on our society? There's almost this underlying fear or this guilty subconscious that we messed up in these countries, but that doesn't mean we have to bring these people over here. And on the other hand, the people who would argue for immigration argue it as a sort of comeuppance, as a sort of karmic sort of retribution that you messed these people up and now you have to host them. How do you appreciate this framing? Is it
I
something
don't. I mean,
acceptable to
I
you?
think, yeah. I mean, I'm not. Look, I'm not sure how. I think to myself, look, at the root of all of these things should be about human beings, about humanity, right? Um, I understand, for example, if you said, look, if you're coming here for just jobs, well, you have your own, that's a policy issue. But look, if someone's come and they've fled war and so on, I believe as a human being, what is, look, I believe that the plate is wide, right? That we have, you've been written, what food has been written for you was written for you in your mother's womb. That's what I believe. So it's not going to decrease from me if I let this poor soul in, right? Now, I do accept though that poor soul has an obligation, right? You can't come and also you have to, as I believe my ethics would say, I need to add to it. That's what I believe, right? But you know, it's not going to reduce from your wealth by helping a poor soul. Because really, if you look at, okay, let's use Pakistan. Look, when the Russians invaded, how many Afghans were given refuge and so on and so forth? You know, I hope, and I don't think that you know, those people that were helped, you say how many lives were saved, you know, and Pakistan's not a rich country. We're talking about the G7 countries, bro. So if 0.2% or whatever is coming over to Britain, okay, it's not an economy thing. But I do understand that, look, if, for example, we use a country like Sweden, which had a very homogenous society, it didn't go across, it doesn't have it's not like an American tradition where immigrants go in, right? We're talking about a very homogenous society with it, and it's quite an insular society in some ways. And you have, strangers from coming outside and so on. That can be an impact, and I understand that. I'll give you an example. I was in Finland a few years back, and I remember, the Finns are a very sweet people, bro. Honestly, really, really nice, kind people. And I could understand how, and I went into one of the suburbs, and I smelt cannabis, and I kind of followed it, and I realized, oh, okay. So there's, cannabis is not known in the Finnish society before. And then here you've had, let's say, it was a Somali community in that case that had, that was smoking this stuff. And I'm like, okay, so I can see how that jars, bro. Of course, refugees, when they go, they come with their traumas and so on, but it jars. And I can understand why that's an issue. Finns aren't obliged to give, necessarily refuge to these people. If they've given refuge, then there is an obligation, as well as on those people who have been given refuge, to actually, stick to the law. Don't do these things. And I think there is a religious element to this as well. Don't spread what you would call fasad. If you come to that country, do good, build on it, and contribute, and so on and so forth. That's the right thing to do, and that's how I've been raised.
What's the mood on ground? How are the, because you interact with the entire Muslim diaspora in the UK, all different sorts, African and Arabs and even European converts and desis and all over the place, Muslims. And what is the on ground feeling? Are people looking at re-immigration options? Do people want to finish generational projects,
So
complete
so
them
so
in
there
one night?
is. I mean, look, you've got the uncles. Uncles are always thinking, look, listen, I intended to, they send money back home, and they always think about that. So that's, they think about their retirement plan, and that's okay.
Right.
There are some people that think, hang on, I don't know anything else. This is my country. I've seen that too, and they're not wrong. They're not wrong. It is their country, you know. You also have to look at, for example, recently there were uh, Tower Hamlets. I don't know if you know Tower Hamlets. I'm sure they've
Somewhere.
got a very one of your chicken branches there too. I'm sure of it, right?
No,
But it's a
no,
very really okay.
no.
He needs to open it because he'll make a lot of money from it.
We can hook it up. ठीक है.
It's a
सही है.
South Asian area in the heart. It's in Whitechapel, in the heart of London, right? And there were rumors that there were, some of these far right guys were going to march, and a lot of the South Asians, a lot of Bengal, they got out, and these were like basically roadmen, street guys, balaclavas, and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, okay, this was like, we're not going to allow these guys that used to cause problem in the 70s, killing the textile workers, all this kind of stuff, to march through here. That was intimidating for the kind of the Eastern white population. I understand that. At the same time, that you can't have the far right marching through there. That's like a red line. So there is that. So there is an attitude where they're like, look, we're going to fight them. We're not going to allow this. But I always think to myself, you're in a minority, aren't you? At one point, when you look at, for example, Nazi Germany, if you study Nazi Germany, you realize that there comes a point where the people will be silent when the state starts taking away the Romani gypsies and the Jews and so on and so forth. And that could happen.
The people are silent about ICE in America.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, that's a very good example. And America is an immigrant country. It's an immigrant. It's built on immigration. I mean,
UK is not.
It's
UK
not.
Is not. No.
So I could see that happening. And I think a lot of people, especially those people who have lived abroad, who have got means, they certainly think about it. I certainly am.
Do you think the projects failed? Do you think the projects failed? Do you think it's not to be cynical entirely? Me personally, I don't see any redeeming aspect to it, and I don't see it surviving the century. But do you think that it's failed monumentally, or some mortal minority will be left behind? Will this happen in an ugly fashion?
No, I think look, maybe I'm being a little bit controversial here in some ways. I think the Muslims are not unsimilar to what the Catholics were during in the early modern period, in the sense that the Catholics, their loyalty was not to king but to the Pope, right? And I think in some ways, and I think there's been studies here whereby Muslims are seen almost as unintegratable, although we are very integrated. We just don't go to the pub. We just don't do all of those things, right? But in many ways, it's this issue is like, okay, we're not. If you are a certain kind, like for example, the Afro-Caribbean, a lot of they're very integrated, right? They're very integrated.
The Windrush generation
to the population, in the sense that you find this of course with other cultures, which if you embrace kind of the English culture, wherein you're going out, you're doing X, Y, and Z, going out for a drink with your friends and so on, I think you can be that. I think that's fine. I think it's when you are holding on. And remember, look, this is something a friend of mine mentioned. If you look at the South Asian community that settled in Britain, right? What were they? Okay, some of them are going to be from Kashmir, and some of them were from Sylhet. Now, these are very, very frontier-like kind of communities. And what do I mean by that? Because they're on the frontier, the border community, they hold on to things quite tightly, So what did the South Asians do in East End, or the Bengalis do, or the Sylhetis? They as soon as they landed, they're actually considered to be what you guys call Pindus, like country bumpkins. They're not city folk. They come in. First thing they do is they set up mosques. They set up these things. What did the Kashmiris do when they came? They set up mosques. They did these. They really hold on to their traditions. If you look at the Italian community in Britain who built the roads, you couldn't tell them just by the surname that they're Italian. But they're not, they don't exist almost in Bedford there. But like you go to up north, the Kashmiris, the Punjab, these are places which they've held on to their tradition. There's a strong culture. Persian, they've got all of they've held on to this tradition. And in a way is far harder to kind of integrate possibly. And that those sorts of people, I think they're like, oh, we don't want that. But if you are someone who just blends in, live the kind of embrace those aspects of the values that they have, I think that they'll be fine. I don't think that we're all going to be, but I would say, once you kick out the Muslims, they might go after the blacks, they might go after the Africans, they might go after all of these people as well. So be aware, you know. And I think that's something that it's worth considering. I'm not sure if it's failed, but I think the momentum is for the far right. You know, and I think maybe we've got 10 years, 15 years. That's my view, you know, and that's my view. You know,
what options do people have?
You know what? Your average Pakistani mechanic who doesn't see any, you know, he might be one of those guys. It'll be like, look, I'll wait for the house prices to rise and I'll go back to pack. I'll be too late. You know, just like a lot of the Moors did in Spain. They thought, you know, I mean, maybe I'm just being very, very alarmist, but I'm just expressing a sentiment that I'm seeing. But I feel that for them the options aren't great, but for others, you know, those people kind of who are in the middle class and stuff, maybe they're like, okay, look, man, I can look to the Middle East. I think the Middle East is booming. You know, there are opportunities in the Middle East. There's, you know, Syria, Egypt, you know, pack, especially with the deal that's going on with the Saudis and stuff. You know, you're going to see that country booming. You know, because you know, and so on. But I do feel that there is a plan B, that everyone should have a plan B. You know, everyone should have it, and I think I'm not being stupid for saying that.
What does that mean for like having a plan B? That kind of mentality of having a fallback and never sort of really belonging. What does that mean for the people who are under 16, 18, 20, you know, younger people, the kids of the immigrants, the kids of the kids of the immigrants, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look,
what does that mean for them?
You know what I've said to all the kids, all my cousins who are at university. Listen, I said, listen, make sure that you do, when you do your work, that you're looking at places, everything from China, Malaysia, Dubai, you know, go out, be that way. Because the problem, you see, the thing is, look, like yourself, bro, you have a sense of home and being. This is you know, where you are, this is your home. Yeah. Do you see? You don't have the nifaq or the hypocrisy that you kind of, the double life, all of this kind of stuff that you have to kind of live, you know, an authentic life. You can live an very authentic life and it's fine. Yeah. Whereas people in the West, a lot of the immigrant and diaspora, you know, they have that. There is this tension that always cuts through, you know, and that is something that you have to deal with. And I always say to my cousins and my nephews that, look, you know, don't just think that, yeah, this is, you know, the UK is a place that the world is vast, you know, and be ready to, you know, move if you need to. I always say that, and I would advise that to all of them, because you should have a plan B, you know, because anyone who studied history will know this. Europe does have a tendency to become like that.
It's a very stark image that you've presented with the juxtaposition of the Moorish Spain and the fall of and loss of Moorish Spain.
I mean, you know, I would recommend everyone to read an author called Matthew Carr and the book Blood and Faith. So what he does in this book, Matthew Carr says, look at the process, not how the Muslims were kicked out in 1492. What he does in Blood and Faith is he covers the period after 1492 and the Muslims that lived underneath the Castilian king. And you see the process of how their identity and everything were eliminated over a process of 200-300 years, from the Jesuits, from food, from hijab, from all of these kind of things, and you see parallels. Because the human being, I think that we've bought into this liberal idea of progress, that human beings progress. I don't believe human nature changes. I think human nature, anyone who boxes will tell you that human nature, when stripped raw in the boxing room, will tell you it's the same. It doesn't change, right? It doesn't change.
Right.
Yeah. So if you understand human nature, you will understand that, there hasn't been progress, right? It's been the same from the time of Adam to now. And if that is the case, and I go by that thesis, it is very possible for a man to do X, Y, and Z. Because I'll give you many examples. Look at what's happening in Sudan right now. Look at what's happening in Gaza. Look at what's happening. You can go back and look at Bosnia and look at how easily it is that the neighbor can just kill, who's X, Y, and Z. So this is not human nature. Bro, I've covered the Syrian war over 10 years inside and from outside. Human nature, bro, hasn't changed. We are beastly, and so on. And I always say, especially to kids, they should do martial arts. They should do all of these kind of things because it's important.
To be aware of the bestial base nature of man.
Yeah, because you have to. We always aspire to be the best people and have manners and so on. But you also need to know how to look after you and your family and so on and so forth. And you have to prepare for that worst case scenario. So definitely, if you read Matthew Carr, you'll realize that it's not a joke. This stuff that's going on, it's frightening, bro. It actually is frightening, and it's not necessarily that most people are decent, but we have an animal aspect of that, or of us.
Yeah, given the right circumstances, those decent people can tear you to shreds. Yeah,
absolutely. And in comparison to the population, the Muslim diaspora is tiny, so that's something that is worth taking into account. And I don't mean to say that the English are murderers. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that history.
No, just human.
Yeah, we understand that human nature can turn beastly given the let's say you have an economic crisis, and then you've got the far right, and you've got all of this stuff pumping all of this kind of stuff. If you can kill people in Gaza, if you can kill X, Y, and Z people in fashion in Sudan openly in front of the cameras, then what is it? And I've seen it in Syria, same thing. Why can't, if you have been to Saydnaya, right, and you see what these people experience in these prisons in Syria, these human beings, right, done by another human being, right, who's got kids and who's got pictures. I saw them, these people have got pictures of their own children while they're doing all these evil things, right? Then why not in this country and Germany and everywhere else? It's possible. And in Muslim countries too, plenty of evil is being done in Muslim countries,
Yes.
So, because the human nature is the same, That
was Tam Hussein with The Walking Dead, and we are living amongst the Walking Dead. Hide your kids, hide your wife,
No, look.
I'm kidding. No, I'm just pulling your leg. It's a very cogent argument, and I completely accept that human nature is unchangeable. You can tell me that you've moved a mountain, but human beings are human beings. Tam, thank you so much for your time. It's a bleak situation, but it's a human one. It's not anything outside of the realm of humanity. Right?
And that's precisely it. And that's why we look at the past lessons. We're like, okay, it's possible. Don't think that it's not possible. It's possible. That's the thing I just want to put, okay, I hope it doesn't happen. I don't wish on anyone, and I wish everything is but I'm also thinking look, it's very possible. I'm a graduate of history, and you see these things happening, and I'm very aware of it. So, maybe you'll see me in Islamabad one day.
Inshallah, we will see you in Islamabad and in Lahore. That was Tam Hussein. Thank you so much for your time, brother. Hopefully, we'll have you back again soon, inshallah.
Thank you. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.